So my Psycho X stalker story happened on the west coast of the United States about 11 years ago. I was a 23-year-old female living in my very first apartment. I was single, working part-time and going to college, so I was more focused on getting my life together than dating. Valentine's Day was fast approaching, and of course I didn't have a special someone in my life at the time. So a coworker of mine thought it would be a good idea to hook me up with a single guy she knew named Jack. Jack and I talked on the phone for a few days before meeting in person. When we eventually met, Jack brought flowers, candy, and immediately told me how attracted he was to me, even saying that I was his girl now. It struck me as kind of an odd thing to say, as it was our first time meeting, but I thought he was really handsome. He was 6'1", I'm 5'3". He had a gorgeous smile and seemed really sweet, so I just brushed the oddness off. We hung out for a few weeks, and during that time Jack started acting very strange and clingy. He was very quiet and liked to ask questions about me, and told me a lot about his personal life. But besides a simple hi, he basically ignored and never spoke to any of my family or friends who came to visit often. He always wanted to occupy my time, wanted to know what I was doing all the time, and would get angry if I was busy or had other plans. He wasn't physically abusive, but he was really possessive. He even told me he loved me a month or so after knowing me, but I kind of laughed it off thinking he was joking around. One night, he actually got on his knees to propose to me. I told him we'd only been knowing each other for a few months, and we should wait until we're both ready, and besides, he didn't even have a ring. He said he was ready to get married as soon as possible. We could go to the courthouse now and he'd buy me a ring later. No, thank you. If it's meant to be, we'll get married when the time comes. The very next week, he gets back on his knees and proposes again, still no ring, pressuring me and saying he was ready now. At this point, I started to freak out a little bit. Not only was he very clingy, but he was moving way too fast for me. I mean, we'd only been dating a couple of months. I was still busy with work and school, so I told him maybe we should take a break from hanging out for a while. He got this really weird look on his face and got really quiet, but eventually started smiling and agreed with me that we should take a break. After a few days of not hearing from him, I came home to find him sitting on my staircase. I ask him what he's doing there, and he just tells me that he's waiting for me and smiles. After an awkward moments of silence, I tell him that he needs to go home. He got up and left, but then he started randomly stopping by my place. If I was ever there, I tried to pretend not to be. He would knock for about 30 minutes, leave for a couple, and then come back. He started waiting on my staircase for me to get home so much, I had to hide at a neighbor's apartment and wait until he eventually left. He called my cell phone non-stop, and I just ignored him. After a couple of months of this, he just stopped all of a sudden. I was relieved that he might have finally gotten the point. After about 3 months of not hearing from him, I get a call from an unfamiliar number. I answered, and it was Jack. He wanted to know how I was doing, and he wanted to come and see me. He also said he'd told his mother about me, and she wanted to meet me too. I got super creeped out and a bit upset, and I told him no, to lose my number and stop calling me. I guess he heard the opposite, because he started randomly knocking on my door again. He knocked on my door a couple of times, and each time I had a friend or family member tell him to leave, and not come back. Each time he smiled and said he understood. The third time he came over was the last straw for me. I had my best friend tell him I wasn't there. I was, but I was in hiding. He asked her if he could wait for me inside my apartment until I got back. She told him no, and then he tried to force his way in. My friend called my name, and I ran out to help her shut the door. Heart racing, I told him I was going to call the police if he didn't leave, and to never come back again. He mumbled something through the door, and then I could hear him walking down the stairs. I ended up not calling the police that night, but I regret that decision to this day. Jump forward about 5 or 6 months later. It was a bright, sunny Saturday afternoon. 2 of my younger sisters, 17 and 14, were visiting. I was still laying in my bed because I had a major migraine. Since I lived alone, I'd gotten used to leaving my bedroom door open so I could hear everything. I could hear them watching and talking about Vanilla Sky, the Tom Cruise movie. I could also hear kids laughing and playing outside. Nothing weird whatsoever. I took more aspirin, then dozed off again, but I was shortly awoken by a loud bam. At first, I thought maybe a kid had bounced a ball or something off my door. Then I heard it again, and my sister started yelling, "What the hell is that?" Just as I was about to get up to see what was going on, bam. I heard screaming, and then a man's voice yelling, "Get the fuck up!" I started to panic, so this part might sound kinda fucked up, but since I had no clue what was going on or who the persons were, I slowly closed my door, blocked it with a dresser, sat on the floor in front of it and called 911. In my state of mind, I thought it would be better to get the police over ASAP instead of risking my life even further by running into an unknown situation. Maybe the intruder didn't know it was a third person there. Anyway, I told the operator someone had broken into my apartment and sounded like he was threatening my sisters and that the police needed to come fast. The operator asked me a lot of questions about how many or what the intruders looked like, but of course I couldn't say because I was still laying in my bed when it started. While I'm speaking with the 911 operator, I could hear the man's voice asking, "Where's your sister? She doesn't know what I had to do for her. I love her." I heard more screams, and then I heard, "She's in the room." At that point, my heart started beating triple time. I don't know why they told this person where I was. Maybe just out of pure terror, or maybe getting me back for not coming out of my room to check the situation. But next thing I know, my bedroom door was being kicked hard. So hard I thought I actually started sliding across the floor. The intruder stops kicking at my door and yells, "If you don't open the door right now, I'll kill everybody." I was so scared, literally crying and begging, asking the 911 operator where the police were at. The whole ordeal was only about 5 minutes, but in a situation like this, time slows way down, and it seemed like it went on for hours. I guess the intruder must have heard me talking to 911, because all of a sudden he stopped and took off running out of the apartment. I was still on the phone, crying with the door shut, when one of my sisters knocked and said it was okay to come out because he was gone. I opened the door and asked who he was. They said it was Jack. I couldn't believe it. In broad daylight, Jack kicked in my door with a sawed-off shotgun and threatened to kill my sisters and myself. The police ended up catching him about a week or so later. During this time, I found out through the police report that there was a previous incident that occurred with Jack a couple of weeks before mine. The police were called because someone was shooting a shotgun in the air. When the police arrived, they found Jack playing with the gun. They asked why, and Jack had said because someone had broken into his apartment, stole his weed, and cut off the tip of his tongue. Not even kidding. The police just issued him a ticket. Anyway, I actually helped catch him by giving them one of his family members' addresses that I found in the phone book, and they caught him headed to their house. He confessed right there, but after he was arrested, he pled not guilty. He ended up taking a plea deal and only ended up serving 5 years. I moved to a different state after that. The even scarier part I found out later is that when he got released, he moved into a halfway house literally right across the street from my old apartment where he kicked my door in. 11 years have passed, and I still don't feel completely safe. I feel at any moment I could run into him randomly, or hear my door being kicked in again. I move constantly, change my number every year. I carry pepper sprays and tasers with me everywhere I go, and never go to bed without checking if the doors and windows are locked tight. I even put a chair under the doorknob before I go to sleep at night. Background. My mom dated a guy, Will, when my older sister and I were much younger. I was about 3 and my sister was about 9. They had been dating for a couple years until she figured out he'd been doing hard drugs, so she broke off the relationship. He didn't take this too well and started stalking her, which leads us to the story I'm about to tell you. In the beginning, it wasn't that bad. She would coincidentally run into him places, as well as receive numerous phone calls each week asking for her to come back to him. Each time, she would say no because he still wasn't sober. This frustrated him, and soon things began to get worse. My mom soon received threats from him, and no longer felt safe with just the 3 of us in our apartment. Because of him, I began to stay with my dad a lot more. I normally didn't stay with my dad because of his alcoholism, and my mother and sister stayed with my grandmother and grandfather. As soon as my mom started staying with them, he caught on. Within the first couple of days, my mom had woken up to a broken windshield and a rock on the seat. It was never proven, but we know he did it. After this fiasco, things started to subside a little bit, until finally nothing happened at all. My mother gathered her things as well as my sister, and they moved back to the apartment. Months went by, and my mom had heard nothing from Will. I went back to living with my mom, and things returned to the way they used to be, except I would still go see my dad on occasion. One of the nights I stayed with my dad, my sister begged my mom for them to spend the night at my grandma's. At first she said no, but after a while gave in and packed up their things for the night. While there, my mom's phone number came up on the caller ID. My mom automatically knew that Will was in the apartment. It took police no time at all to get there, seeing as they had been called a few times before regarding Will. When they entered the apartment, all the lights were off. When they turned them on, they saw him in a chair facing away from them. He stood up thinking it was my family members coming home, and gave the police a clear view of the knife in his hand. Will was hauled off to the police station, while some cops searched the apartment. First, they discovered a broken window on the first-floor apartment, which is what he used to get in. Then in the bedroom, they found that alcohol had been poured all over the bed, and shards of glass were everywhere. After that came the most chilling discovery: a lighter on the bedside table. While Will was in jail, my mom came to pick me up from my dad's house and take me home one night. She came in to get me, took me out to the car, and strapped me into my car seat in the back. She walked around to the front of the car, and as she started to get into the driver's seat, she noticed a man in the passenger seat. He cursed at her, and as she ran around to get to the back to me, he escaped. The cops were called, and although my mom had cash and her medications in plain sight, the only thing that was taken was some of her personal information. Her social security card or driver's license or something like that. It was obvious to my mother that this man had been hired by Will while he was locked up. And because of police apathy, Will was released from incarceration after a short amount of time. My mom had taken out a restraining order on him, but that didn't stop him from contacting her again. Will called her and asked for her back again, and my mom, of course, said no. Desperate to be with her, he took drastic measures to get her attention. He figured if maybe he was hurt, she would feel bad for him and take him back. Using that rationale, he grabbed a gun and shot himself in the leg, knowing it wouldn't cause much harm. Little did he know he shot right into a major vein/artery, so he bled to death right on the spot. This story always gives me chills when I hear it. My family never even told me about it until I was 12. If my sister hadn't begged to stay with my grandparents out of nowhere, things could have been very different for all involved. In college, a while ago, I got into a relationship with a guy. He was fine until he found Jesus. He quickly went crazy, claiming demons spoke to him, trying to buy weapons from some shady friends we had, fantasizing about how he would hurt people, and becoming incredibly controlling and physically abusive, nearly killing me a few times. Needless to say, I got the fuck out. After a few threats and really crazy behaviors, he left me alone for a while, and I thought that was that. I was heading to my dorm after a meeting one night, when I decided to pass it and go to the student union, which was right down the street, to get some ice cream. As I passed the dorm, I heard steps behind me. I turned around, and I thought I saw someone in a white shirt ducked behind a big signboard. I kept walking, listening carefully. I heard something move and whipped around again. There, a person, his size, staring at me from behind a tree. I couldn't see very well, but it really looked like him. I was mildly freaked out by then, but just walked a little faster. I'd hear occasional footsteps and breathing behind me, but I didn't dare stop or let on that I knew someone, probably him, was there. I knew he owned a gun, and would likely put a bullet into me given the chance. He was that psycho and upset that I dared to break up with him. I walked all the way down to the union, got some ice cream, and just sat there in the store eating, unwilling to go back out into the unlit street in case it was my crazy armed ex. I still hadn't mustered the nerve to head back when my phone suddenly buzzed. My heart just about fell out of my chest when I saw the message. It was some of my friends, a very sweet couple. They'd been walking way behind me when they saw something that alarmed them enough to text me. "Your ex is walking around the street." They called me before I could even text them back. "Hey, where are you? Your ex is prowling around here near your dorm. He was coming back from the direction of the union. I think he had a gun. Was he with you? What's going on?" Panicked, I assured them that I had not been with him, but someone who looked like him had been following me, and I was at the union and too scared to go back alone. They practically yelled at me to stay there and not go anywhere, and that they were coming. A few minutes later, they came running into the union, breathless, eyes wide, asking me why he was by my dorm and what had happened. This was probably what scared me most of all. The boyfriend, who is a black belt in karate and is never scared, looked absolutely terrified. He was coiled into some kind of fighting stance and looking around wildly, afraid that my ex would appear out of nowhere with his gun. They told me they were taking me back to my dorm and calling the cops. They sandwiched me between them, and we walked back to my dorm as quickly as we dared, the boyfriend walking in front and yelling into the darkness that my ex had better not try anything. I let the two of them into my dorm, and we went up to my room, where my roommates put in a frantic call to the police. As we peeked out the windows facing the street inside of the dorm, there he was, lurking in the trees to the side and looking up. A streetlight reflected something in his hand, something shiny. I saw him tug at the .22. I realized he was carrying, and looked up. We locked eyes, and I saw something, this kind of rage in his eyes that froze me. In that moment I knew he really was out to kill me, and my friends and I had foiled him this time. He quickly turned and ran away through the trees. We didn't know whether he would come back and try to break in or something, so we called the police again, and lo and behold, sirens within minutes, and officers with guns drawn combing the area. They caught him a few hours later, still with the .22 in hand. He confessed that he was indeed going to try to kill me if he had the chance, but he didn't want to take potshots at me with my friends there. Apparently, since I had broken up with him, I was given over to Satan, and he had a duty to make sure I died and went to hell. Of course, he went to jail, and later to a mental hospital, and I moved out of that dorm a week later. I just couldn't live with the thought that he could break out and come after me again. I got some cop friends to keep an eye on my roommates until they could move out too. I was never really the same after that. I was so afraid and paranoid for years and years. Now I can be out and about without any fear, but I still have nightmares about him staring at me through the trees, gun in hand and rage in his eyes.